Reinforce your claim on a new land, provide for your people, feed them, defend them, tax them. This is Manor Lords, and I am thrilled to be able to dive into this with you today. My name's Willis, and I'm going to be sharing the journey of my first few towns and showing you what the game's early access has to offer. We'll either prosper or die trying. Let's dig in. First and foremost, a huge thank you to the publisher Hooded Horse for sending me over a copy early to get stuck into. You guys rock. Manor Lords is the creation of Slavic magic, and I want to circle back to the dev at the end of the video, but let's talk big picture first. In case you missed it, the game has been rapidly climbing up Steam's most wanted list, and for good reason. It's a medieval city builder, with a few key points that separate it from the pack. The first and most obvious one, how it looks. I don't need to try and convince you of anything here. Visually, it is incredible. Next big thing is the way it handles town building. It's gridless. You aren't placing houses in neat blocks, you're designating plots of land and your villagers will take it from there. Roads are lovely and sweeping. Fields are formed in irregular patchwork. It looks natural. You create a town that feels straight out of the Middle Ages, and you do it with ease. The other badge on its sleeve is combat. Warfare is a feature in town builders here and there, but it's usually either confined or happens off screen. Not here. You'll rally and equip troops and get attacked by bandits or other lords. All warfare happens in the game world and you'll have full control of your army, as well as a front row seat to the carnage. Now, it's pretty common for people to make the association with Total War, and at first glance, yeah, it does look like that, but I want to diffuse that now. It's not Total War. You can't just conjure a legion of healthy troops and wage all-out conflict on your neighbors. Battles are a very important part of the game, but they aren't the whole game. It's a town builder first and foremost, but I'll get into the details and the differences later. So I figured the best way to show you guys what's on offer and what to look forward to would be by letting you in on the journey I took. And before you provide a home for the peasants of your land, there's a few decisions you gotta make, mostly aesthetic ones. A face and a name for your ruler, and a crest to adorn your banners. The coat of arms designer is nice and in-depth, and you can even upload your own banner. 10 points for anyone who recognizes this symbol. Shout out in the comments if you know it. There's quite a few settings to tweak your game experience and different scenarios to choose from. Whether you want an idyllic, chilled building experience or a sweaty fight for survival, you'll choose that here. I opted to go for the prosperity scenario with a bit of combat. We all want to see a few battles, don't we? The game world is split into 8 regions. Each area has its strengths, more iron or stone or wild animals in greater abundance. They also have differing crop fertility, so one area might be a perfect spot for a farming town, while others might have gritty, horrible, terrible soil, in which case you'll have to rely on hunting in the forest for your food or trade with wandering merchants. It's a good idea to get a lay of the land and think about what kind of town you're gonna make before you start. Though I didn't know that when I started playing. See, I studied at the school of learning through failure. Once you've admired the lovely landscape for a bit, it's time to get the ball rolling. Your villagers will need food to eat and a roof over their heads. Set up a few logging camps, assign villagers to work there, and start building. The way housing works in this is pretty novel. You're not placing down homes, but designating land, burgage plots as they're called in the game. Depending on the size allocated, homes may have space for a goat pen or vegetable farm. Later down the line, residents can even open their own businesses. You can cycle how many plots take up a space, and the homes will neatly fill whatever shape they allocate. This is a really great system. Houses will curve around roads, fill irregular gaps, and really make the most out of any space you put them in. If you give your townsfolk a little bit of breathing room and invest in their chicken coop or veggie plot, they'll passively generate food. They'll take their harvest and sell it to their neighbors at market. Variety is the spice of life, and your people will enjoy a vegetable here and there to break up their meal plan of grit and gruel. The more needs you provide for, the happier your people are. The happier they are, the greater the chance of pulling in outsiders to move into your lovely little hamlet. Give them all they need and they will climb up the social ladder. Once upgraded, your serfs, oh, I guess I shouldn't really call them serfs now, should I? Your people can adopt a trade. They can become a blacksmith, making arms and armor for your army, or a brewer who stocks the tavern with lovely warm medieval ale. This is essentially taking production and industry out of designated buildings and making it an add-on of residential areas, which is an interesting approach. The goods they produce can be cycled back into your town, or designated for trading, and the way the economy works in the game is pretty abstract. So you don't just sell a hat and gain some coins. Any money generated doesn't go to you as the ruler, it stays in the town. You can extract it little by little through taxation, but mostly that money can only be used to improve people's homes or trade. So you have your personal supply and your town supply. You can't go pinching their coffers just as they can't yours. It does break a lot of dug-in systems from other city builders, and the result is something that feels fresh. You don't have your industrial zone and then your residential district. It all melds together. Money has to come from somewhere, and it stays in circulation rather than lining your pockets. The intricacies of a medieval economy did keep me busy for a while, so long in fact that I forgot I'd selected a scenario with combat and had absolutely not been building an army at all. And of course, bandits were attacking. So I mentioned earlier about the trouble in thinking of this as a war game. See, you don't just buy troops. You can hire mercenaries, sure, but they're costly. If you're going to get into a fight, chances are it's your townsfolk who'll be drafted. And you can't just say, "You're a soldier now," and they'll dig out a full suit of arms from under their bed. You have to provide the weaponry, armor, and organize them into regiments. This requires a lot of planning and commitment, and starting all of that when the bandits are sighted means you won't really have time to fully organize a proper defense. But I wasn't worried. I had a plan. Now, I'm no expert on medieval warfare, but I do know that the longbow is probably the greatest invention ever made. I decided to funnel all my efforts into making as many archers as I could to repel the rampaging heathens. With every able-bodied man armed and dressed, I sent them to meet the enemy in a nearby field, and after a few volleys had rained down upon the vagabonds, my men were slaughtered. My army was decimated and strewn lifeless around my village. In a war game, this is where you just, build another battalion and hit back. But again, not a war game. And these aren't just rando soldiers. These were my townspeople, my woodcutters, hunters, miners, priests, ox handlers. Every man and son of working age drafted into the army and killed. You can bounce back from this, but doing so would mean burying about 50 former villagers. And that sounds like a lot of work, so I decided to start again. Sunston had fallen, but New Sunston would rise. In my second town, I picked up a few tricks and knew the point I needed to get to, so I quickly laid down all the workplaces and assigned people their jobs. No messing around. But here's another life lesson to be learnt from my failures. Don't do this. Yes, everyone quickly got working on my 5-year plan, but that left no one to build houses. My villagers got more and more unhappy about being homeless, and no new workforce was coming in. By the time I'd rectified that whole palaver, the lack of extra workforce meant my food generation wasn't going anywhere, and I botched up my whole town in record time. So, like every great leader, I did what needed to be done. I swept the failure under the rug and started again. Time to found New Sunston. Here I got to the point of being somewhat industrious in good time. I learned my past lessons and I opted to focus my artisans into producing shields, so my archers would have someone to stand behind. Smart. But as I got further and my town got bigger than my previous attempts, a new balancing act came in. When you've got a handful of people, a couple of hunters and a woodcutter can provide all the food and fuel they need. But as you go from hamlet to village to town, you've got a lot more mouths to feed. A few winters in and I was on a knife's edge. No food left in the stores and anything scrounged up was eaten in seconds. Again, another issue that's arisen from poor planning. Things can take a turn quite quickly, and New Sunston went from A-OK to famine in a matter of months. Things got stressful, people were dying, and I was no help at all. It was like playing Banished all over again. I hadn't really seen the survival side in the early stages because it's easy enough to feed a small population, but as you progress you definitely do step into survival town building waters, especially when you're having to split your workforce between producing food to stave off death and weapons to stave off death at the hands of bandits. A few families starved while I regained control of the food supply. But on the bright side, I had an army. Not just peasants with weapons either, I had my own personal heavily armoured retinue. Quite an important building I'd missed in my first town was the Manor Hall, which ups your presence in the land. The soldiers that come with it are a darn sight more useful than your usual rabble. They can be customized, renamed, and it looks like later in development they can even earn experience and unlock traits. The building also lets you tax your town, though I didn't fully have a handle on the economy by this point, so so that didn't really amount to anything. My scouts had spotted that the raiders were coming to attack New Sunston, but this time I was ready. Landscape for battles is important. Archers on the high ground and a defensive line forcing the enemy to attack uphill. Now that's the dream. I'd found the perfect spot, but the raiders chose not to attack me there, so instead we met in the wilderness. Things went a lot better this time. The shield wall held back the enemy tide, and the archers were able to get off more than 2 volleys before being killed. Though, after a lot of back and forth, my units did start to rout. They got clear of the enemy and took one final stand on the outskirts of the village. Vastly outnumbered, they gave it their all. My retinue was brought low, but wouldn't surrender in their home region. My last man-at-arms, I'd named him Sir Kill-A-Lot, went out in a blaze of glory, taking on a dozen soldiers at once. But alas, he fell, and seeing their opening, the raiders did what they did best, and killed all my archers. But I had an ace up my sleeve, a second batch of fresh recruits barreling towards the battle, and I was using my original tactic. All archers, no shields. Yeah, they got brutalized again. But at the very last second, as the raiders were wailing on the last longbowman, something snapped, and they started to rout. They'd managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I've no idea how, but I came out the other end with a few soldiers intact. New Sunston would survive, and while every woman in town was now a widow, it really didn't take long for eligible bachelors to move in and prey on the grief-stricken war widows. Oof, talk about opportunism. I like my city building games on the unforgiving side. I mess up a lot, and I find joy in starting over and doing a little better each time. I found Manor Lords to be a delicate balance between surviving and thriving, towing the line between providing for your people and raising an army. But this is the really neat thing. It doesn't have to be like that. By changing the scenario and tweaking the settings, it can be a really idyllic, chill building game where you can lay out beautiful organic cities. It's 2 very different games in one. The warfare is interesting, and it's a big part of the game if you want it to be, but it's not important because it's frequent. It's important because of the ramifications. Developing a military splits your focus from providing for your people, and losing your troops isn't an abstract. You are literally losing your population. Throwing your weight around recklessly can, and probably will, tank your economy. Because the stakes are high, you're engrossed in the battles. It isn't massive armies clashing back and forth every year, it's a few battalions, and defeat means a lot more than a bruised ego. It's a really interesting, impressive game, and all the while I kept forgetting one massive aspect. This is a solo project. I cannot get over that. It's a hell of an achievement, and yes, he's received help on various aspects of the game, but this is a 7-year labor of love from Ggrzegorz Styczeń. Honestly, it's remarkable. I have only really scratched the surface here, and believe you me, I've got a whole lot more to say about this game. But for today, I just wanted to provide an overview, whet your appetite a bit. I'll be making another video on Manor Lords, and the next time round I'll be diving a lot deeper into the mechanics and the nitty gritty, what I liked, what I didn't like, basically highlighting what to look forward to and what to be wary of. I also want to talk about some of the bigger aspects, like running multiple towns in different regions. I didn't fully get to grips on that here, but I will be testing that out and seeing what it's all about. That'll be out next week, so be sure to subscribe and be in line for that. Also, let me know in the comments what mechanics or systems are you eager to see more on, and I can dive into those topics in the next video. And while you're rooting around down there and clicking on things, check out the Patreon link in the info section. You don't have to commit to anything, just have a gander. There's a lot of stuff on there. Anything floats your boat, be sure to give it a follow. Anyway, that's all the Manor Lords for now. I will see you next week for the deep dive, and I cannot wait.